Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to spend some time talking about this new health care bill. We've heard a lot about repeal and replace. Now we know a little bit more about that. And of course, Congress has been diligently debating and discussing this. And first of all, let's look at what happened in the Ways and Means Committee. This morning, you actually had a success after 18 hours of debate and over 24 party line votes. The Republican majority, Kevin Brady, chairman, and the Republicans were able to push through the Ways and Means Committee, the abolition of the tax penalty for those of you that if you do not have the approved Obamacare or Affordable Care Act policy, will not be actually having to pay that penalty. And of course, that only has made its way through the Ways and Means Committee. But things haven't gone quite so well over in the House Energy and Commerce Committee, where at this time it was about 26 hours. Now it's pretty close to 30 hours. But when 26 hours, can you imagine this? More than a day of debate. We had Representative Joe Barton, who is the chairman, actually the vice chairman, I should say, of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, suggest that if we could move things ahead and have an up or down vote on all of the amendments offered by the Democrats, he would actually take everybody out and buy them breakfast at the Waffle House. Well, that didn't go anywhere, and so they will continue to meet. And we're talking about a piece of legislation that is actually fairly small, 123 pages. This one I think you could actually read and digest, which is very different than the more than 2,000 pages that were part of the Affordable Care Act, and of course the 20,000 plus regulations that have been generated by it. So as we go through here, I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a sense of what is happening, how that might affect you, and are there better alternatives? Because if you have been paying attention to the news at all, you know that there are quite a number of groups on both the left and the right that have problems with this particular piece of legislation that has moved through pretty quickly in the House. Of course, still has to go to the Senate, and it's something that President Donald Trump said that he would sign. So if you've got comments or questions at any point, feel free to join us. 1-800-351-1212. Let me just, if I can for just a minute, talk about some of the hurdles which give us pause to wonder whether or not, even though it has moved relatively quickly in these two House committees, whether or not any real repeal and replace will take place. And I come up with at least three reasons. Maybe you have some others you want to add to the list. But the first of which is we are a divided country. You don't have to know very much about politics to figure that out. You've seen maps of red states and blue states. If you are familiar at all with the legislative history of the Affordable Care Act, you know that it was passed by the Democrats and not a Republican vote. This time, the Wall Street Journal said the Democratic position of obstruction is simple and purely political. Oppose everything to add to it the pressure on Republicans, hope the bill fails. Legislative defeats early and a new presidency tend to beget more defeats. So there is no possibility that I can come up with by which you're going to get a significant number, perhaps even any Democrats voting for even legislation they may agree with. Now, that could change. We recognize that you have a number of Democratic senators that are going to be running for re-election in less than 2 years. and they are in many cases in states that were won by Donald Trump. So it's possible that some of them might say, I'm going to vote for something that I think will help my constituents. But again, recognize that there have been all sorts of claims that if indeed you do, we're going to primary you. That is, we're going to find an opponent to run against you in the primary. So first of all, we're a very divided country. That's the first issue. The second one, and certainly a very important one, is it is virtually impossible to remove an entitlement. Just think of the entitlements we have provided. And again, I know some people don't like the term entitlement, but that's what we call it. So, you can call in and tell me we should change the term, and I understand that. But you think about Medicaid, you think about Medicare in the 1960s, even giving the suggestion we change it a little bit, make modifications in it a little bit, are greeted with, you're going to push Granny over the cliff. I'll go all the way back to 1935, Social Security. There is certainly a need somewhere to do some revision, some minor modification. But again, look at how difficult even making modifications are. But when we talk about just not modifying an entitlement, but actually removing that, now, in a minute, I'll explain that not that many people are benefiting, in a sense, from the Affordable Care Act right now. And frankly, even if they are, the Republican alternative, whether you like it or not, does provide something, whether it's a safety net, a high-risk pool, whether it's to expand Medicaid, whatever it might be. But still, it is virtually impossible to remove an entitlement. And that, to me, I think is the genius of some of the liberal mindset, that if we can get something passed by hook or crook, no matter whether it's done constitutionally or not, once it gets implemented, then you have recipients of that particular entitlement. It is really difficult to remove. So even though words like repeal and replace come off the tongue very easily, again, it gets us into whether or not that's really a possibility. And the third, and it's sort of related to this, are people are fearful of change. Sometimes I'll take the devil I have rather than the devil I don't know. I will rather deal with the circumstances I have right now, even if they aren't the best, than the unknown question mark of what will happen in the future. And of course, right now, with Republicans pushing some of this through without getting it scored by the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, you can see there's even a little bit more hesitation. So those are, I think, some reasons why this is going to be tough work and probably could be easily handicapped as destined for failure. But again, let's never underestimate the possibility of a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican President, Donald Trump. But it will be an interesting challenge. And the biggest difficulty is for those that are calling for a free market, they don't have as much to point to. This is a great problem because we really have not had a free market in healthcare at least since the 1960s. Once you had Medicaid and Medicare, you have a lot more people involved from the government side in healthcare delivery. And then you also have this as perhaps one of the most regulated of all industries. And so that's certainly the case as well, to recognize that that's going to be something that people aren't really used to. And so as a result, sometimes they don't really understand when you talk about allowing competition, allowing a free market to work. They haven't seen that in some time, and this is why, as we've pointed out before, those under the age of 30, sometimes even those under the age of 40, tend to believe that socialism is at least as good and sometimes even preferable to capitalism. So these are some of the reasons why this will be difficult. But when we come back, let me spend some time talking about what this might mean to you. And I'd love to get your comments. You've no doubt seen some of the debate. You've, of course, been living under the rules of the Affordable Care Act, and perhaps you have some stories you'd like to share with our listeners as well. So if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. We'll carry this on for a good hour and a half. Then we'll maybe change topics. At that point, I think we'll be ready to do so and hear an interview that I've done on the subject of intelligent design. But at the moment, what are your thoughts about the health care bill, the Republican alternative? We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, an interesting aspect of the immigration debate is how forgiving many Americans can be towards illegal aliens while never extending that same measure of grace to American citizens. One example can be found in the use of the term false documents. The discussion started with a Wall Street Journal editorial that expressed concern that the Department of Homeland Security policy might be so sweeping that it could capture law-abiding immigrants whose only crime is using false documents to work. Victor Davis Hanson couldn't let that statement stand and decided to write a quick response. He explains that rarely is this just a one-time minor transgression by an immigrant in order to create a false document in order to go to work. He says it usually involves the deliberate creation of a false identity, sometimes at the expense of a real person, and often with accompanying fraudulent Social Security numbers and photo identifications. These are crimes that foul up the bureaucracy for law-abiding citizens and even facilitate other crimes. While it may be true that an illegal immigrant might need to create a false document in order to find a job in the United States, it is not merely an endgame or minor infraction. Other possible infractions follow from this first crime of entering the country illegally. Let's at least acknowledge that if a law-abiding citizen engaged in creating false documents, they would face some form of punishment. The government would at least fine them, if not imprison them, for creating false documents. Sure, there are law-abiding immigrants whose only infraction may indeed be the fact that they created a false identity in order to get to work. But the many examples Victor Davis Hanson uses in his column are a reminder that false documents are often not the only infraction. Frequently, false documents make it easier to commit other crimes. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. USA Today, in their particular editorial, talked about the sources of coverage that people have right now. Almost half of you receive your insurance policy from your employer. It's actually 49%. But most of the others receive it in some way or another through the government. 20% from Medicaid, 14% receive Medicare, 2% other government. I would imagine that'd be things like VA and a variety of others. 7% from the Affordable Care Act or direct purchases, and then what's called 9% uninsured, which actually sometimes are not uninsured. For example, those of you, and I would put myself in that category as well, that receive this from a health savings group, and that would be things like Medicare, Medishare, as well as a variety of other alternatives like Samaritan's Ministries and Christian Healthcare Ministries. Those would be listed as uninsured because those are not called insurance, but of course they function almost exactly like that. And so these give you a sense of the fact that we already don't have much of a free market, and we also don't have a great deal of competition. This coming from the Wall Street Journal, nearly a third of counties in the United States are now served by merely one insurer. Well, there's not a lot of competition when you're the only game in town, and that's already in a third of the counties, many of which are counties where this broadcast is heard. well, you recognize the value of any kind of competition. The free market has given us all sorts of other things we depend upon, food and clothing and shelter and consumer goods and the rest. We recognize that oftentimes when you have competition, eventually, whether you're talking about cell phones or televisions or flat screen TVs or cars or whatever it is, you eventually get an improvement in the quality, and you also get a decrease in cost. Just think of the flat screen TVs that you can buy now and how much more expensive they were just a few years ago. So that is certainly the case. And when you look at competition, the examples I will use, and again, all the way through this program, I'll help you understand. I don't believe that medical insurance is exactly the same as car insurance or house insurance, but I think it is a good, helpful illustration when we talk about competition, and that is there's a great deal of competition in car insurance, and if you don't think so, just turn on your television set and look at all sorts of different commercials with cute individuals with little gecko lizards, whatever it might be, selling car insurance. Look at home insurance, the same thing, telling stories about disasters that happen in the home. Just think about the number of medical insurance commercials you've seen. Not so many, right? Because there's not much competition, no real need for that. And so that's something else to pay attention to as well. Let's get into a couple of the issues. First of all, whenever you talk about trying to reform, whether it's repeal or replace or reform healthcare insurance, you have to address what I call the 4 Ps. The first, of course, is price, and we all know the sticker shock that many of us have faced over the last year or so in terms of paying for medical insurance. The second, and one that is going to be front and center in a lot of the debate, are pre-existing conditions, and those are going to be dealt with in a little different way under the Republican health care plan. Then the issue of portability, and that one, we surfaced a little of that even yesterday in our roundtable discussion with our millennials, because as I've pointed out, you look at the younger generation, the estimates are that they will have anywhere from 12 to 15 different employers in a lifetime. And I'm beginning to say that may have that many employers in the next 20 or 30 years, to be perfectly honest. But if indeed you don't have anything that looks like portability, that means he or she will have to get 12 to 15 different healthcare plans. And that also gets to the issue of pre-existing conditions, because if indeed you have to requalify, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, that is a very important issue. So oftentimes there's a connection between this whole idea of pre-existing conditions and portability. And it's something I wish we could get away from, because, again, I recognize there's a difference between medical insurance and other types of insurance, but if you can see this illustration for just a minute, it's an important one. And that is, the situation is that your company does not own your car insurance, your company does not own your house insurance, and the only reason it owns your medical insurance is simply because of sort of an oddity of medical insurance and something that was done, as we talked about with Foster Freeze a few days ago, that was a way to make certain entities competitive because there were wage and price controls. But there really is no difference and should not be any difference. One of the things that was said by U.S. Senator Ben Sasse is a woman driving from one job to another job doesn't have to worry about a fender bender while driving to her next job. Her old employer, new employer don't own her car insurance. She does. Well, and as we talked with Foster Freeze the other day, he used a different illustration. He said, if you are driving from Arizona to Wisconsin and you have a car accident in Iowa, well, your car insurance covers that. But your medical insurance might not, because you'd be, quote, out of the network if you were in a different state. And so some of this just simply needs to change if we're going to make it function effectively for you. But let me come back to this issue of price. One of the things that the Republican repeal and replace would want to do is reduce the number of required mandates. Under the Affordable Care Act, you had all sorts of mandates that said this is what you have to have in a policy, and if it is not in the policy, then the policy is not approved. Well, again, we can understand that there may be some value in having certain kinds of coverage, but should somebody who is over the age of 60 still be mandated to have policies that cover pregnancy, for example? And then how far do we go in terms of screening, a PSA, a pap smear? What about mental health counseling? And of course, a really big issue that is starting to surface right now, and that is, what about this whole idea of abortifacients? I think as you think about this, we really can't get the issue of healthcare reform right if we assume that abortion is a health care issue. And that's the problem we have right now, because we have abortion, which is legal, but at the same time, there are all sorts of groups that want to make sure that your health care dollars and health insurance policies cover Planned Parenthood. They cover abortifacients. They cover a number of other issues. And so Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council, issued a statement saying that he was a little concerned as he looked even at the Republican plan, because you have what are called refundable tax credits that could be used for abortion. So the argument you might have is, well, okay, then they need to probably put in some pro-life language into these particular bills, especially the one that might go to the Senate, in order to prevent that. But the difficulty, and I won't get into the deep weeds here, is in the Senate, they want to use budget reconciliation, but there is a real easy possibility that some of those things like pro-life legislation could be constrained as, and actually construed as, extraneous. That's known as the Byrd Rule. And so as a result, it's possible that even though you might have repeal and replace, you wouldn't have the guarantee that money wouldn't be used for the funding of abortion. And since, as we've pointed out before, that is one thing that many people are advocating, it's a really important issue. So again, I'd love to get your thoughts about some of the issues of health care reform. We're talking today about all sorts of aspects of this 123-page bill that has begun to move its way through the Ways and Means Committee, moving it through the Energy and Commerce Committee, and eventually will go to a floor vote sometime in the future in the House of Representatives. It goes from there to the U.S. Senate, and of course, it seems to be something that President Trump would indeed sign. As a matter of fact, he's called individuals over to the White House last night, including, when this has been an interesting one, Senator Ted Cruz and Heidi Cruz. You wonder what kind of conversation that might have generated with Donald Trump there. And then he's going to invite some others over to go bowling in the White House bowling alley there, set up by Harry Truman. Bowling for dollars, I guess we could call that. And so those are some attempts to move the legislation ahead. But at the same time, many Americans just now are starting to find out about it. It hasn't been scored by the Congressional Budget Office. And when we come back, I want to talk about some of the groups that are convinced that this is not a good idea. But if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. And we've posted some articles for you to read today that relate to this in case you would like to get up to speed on this. The first one, the replacement won't lower health insurance costs. We'll talk about that. That comes from our friend Dr. Merrill Matthews. Obamacare replacement won't drain the health care swamp. And I'll be reading that in just a minute from Janet Orant and get into some of those issues and just a few other articles that we have posted that you can read and maybe pass on to your friends, maybe even post on your Facebook and get a conversation going. We'd love to hear your conversation, so let's open up the phones. 1-800-351-1212. We'll start taking some of those calls right after this.
Former White House policy advisor Gary Bauer.
It's only by listening to things like Point of View that Americans find out what the ultimate agenda is. What we've all got to do is make sure programs like yours and this network continue to thrive, because that's the only way millions of Americans are going to find out the information that they need.
And the way to ensure Point of View Radio thrives is by going online right now or picking up the phone to join Truth Team 360. We bring information, wisdom, and encouragement to help you take action for the good of this community and the nation. Go online now to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Select your giving amount, Choose your gift. Stand together with people all across the land on Truth Team 360. Pointofview.net/team. Join Truth Team 360 by phone 1-800-347-5151 or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get into some of the response to the Republican plan, but also want to take some phone calls along the way. So let's head first to Texas. Richard, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for taking my call. I had a question about the mandate. I'm a little, still a little bit mixed up about it. My wife and I think we're going to have to pay about $1,400 this year for a penalty. And I'm just wanting to find out, do we still have to pay that, or has that actually gone through yet, or will there be some time before it does? And I'm just going to hang up and listen to you on the radio if that's okay.
That is fine. And again, one of the questions that is raised, of course, is about that penalty. And as I understand it, it has made its way through the Ways and Means Committee. I'm reading a secondary account, so again, it's one thing to hear it in the news. It's another thing to see actually how it was reported by Chairman Kevin Brady of Ways and Means. But that's the first step towards removing that tax penalty. Now, where we are right now, though, is kind of intriguing, because one of the things that President Donald Trump has done, and seems like will be followed up by the IRS, is how you fill out your taxes. And that is, when you get your 1040 form, there is line 61. And that's the line that asks you, do you have an approved health care insurance plan? In other words, one that's been approved by the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. In the past, you had to fill that out. But now the IRS says that it will accept 1040s without people filling that out. So there are some who are saying to themselves, if I don't have that plan, I just won't say yes or no. I just simply won't fill it out, and I won't necessarily pay the penalty. That you're in kind of gray area, obviously, because what used to be a mandatory disclosure has now become a voluntary one. But until you have really anything that's a total repeal of the Affordable Care Act, I guess you could still be in sort of a danger area, but that's why some people are simply saying, I will no longer answer line 61, whereas in the past, the IRS could then reject your form because you didn't fill it out on that particular question, because you failed to answer the question. Now they'll accept them, as I understand, with nothing on line 61. So that may be the quicker answer until there is movement through the House, Senate, and signing by President Donald Trump, if that answers your question. And so it's certainly one of those issues that has changed almost by executive order. But the final solution, of course, comes when it is completely removed. And, of course, movement has taken place in the House Ways and Means Committee to do so. But it's still a long way from the Ways and Means Committee to the floor of the House to then a vote in the Senate to a final signature by President Trump. But at least that's the first step, and I hope that answers your question, because it all really revolves around how you fill out line 61 on your IRS form. Let's take some more phone calls. We'll go to Louisiana. Alex, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hello, sir. I'd like to make a comment about this Obamacare 2.0. That's exactly what this is. They haven't done very much to it. I'd like to also make a comment. It's a booby trap. The GOP needs to be careful with this one here. And I'm hoping it doesn't come back to hurt President Trump. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. Okay, let me pick up on that, because you've got a number of people that have said that this is Obamacare light, or that it fails to address some of those significant issues. And the first article I've posted here is by Dr. Merrill Matthews, who's been on the program with us many times before. And he says that for 7 years, the Republicans have complained that the Affordable Care Act makes health insurance unaffordable for millions of Americans. Okay, that's a good statement, and certainly a true statement. Then goes on to say there were two reasons for that. First of all, the abandoning of actuarial standards, and number two, requiring people to have very expensive comprehensive coverage. And he says the Republican bill addresses the second one, and it does, maybe not as much as some would like, but it completely ignores the first one. Now, what did they mean by this? That is that you have to recognize that there are certain standards that an insurance company would have to use. And the problem is when you force an insurance company to cover people with things like pre-existing conditions, that destroys the concept of insurance, because insurance is about pooling groups of people whose premiums cover unknown risks, not known risks. And so what sometimes has also happened, and we saw this first with Romney Care, and now we see it with Obamacare, is where individuals, because there is a requirement, a must coverage kind of situation, is that individuals would stay out of an insurance pool. In other words, they would not pay for insurance, and then when they would need it, because they needed some kind of elective surgery, maybe they had a disease or whatever, insurance companies to actually carry those individuals. Well, what has happened over time is then as soon as they had that particular ailment treated, and if it wasn't chronic, they drop back out. And so you also get the problem of what's called the death spiral. And that is a situation in which over time you have more and more sick people joining into a pool. Healthy people, because it's so expensive, drop out. So then you get sicker people, more sick people, and it becomes ultimately what's known as a death spiral. Now, the attempt was simply to try to find a way to, quote, if you will, penalize people that actually had not been insured. And so there is something that came from Paul Ryan and Tom Price's bills where there would be a look back to say, if you've been uninsured, well, you're going to have to pay a penalty to jump in. But sadly, if you start running the numbers, and Dr. Merrill Matthews, in a piece that I found after we actually posted all of these, points out that if a person has been uninsured for more than 63 days in that period, they'd have to pay 30% more. Well, he says, well, 30% may not be that much, because imagine if you've got somebody whose maybe normal premium is $500 a month. I don't know where that is, but okay, let's just take the number, $500 a month. Then that 30% would make it $650. So paying another $150 for a few months over saving thousands of dollars is still a good deal. So the problem is, even though the Republican plan tries to address in a small way that problem of people jumping into an insurance pool when they aren't paying in insurance in the past, it still isn't enough of a penalty to prevent that from taking place. And so this is, I think, one of these chronic problems that is surfaced. One more I'll mention, because, again, Alex points out that this is something that we could see as a booby trap. Dr. Jane Orient, individual that we've had on this program many times before, is the executive director of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, said that the Obamacare replacement won't drain the healthcare swamp. She says, who are the swamp dwellers? Well, they are the ones who siphon off the huge proportion of $3 trillion of healthcare dollars. Perhaps 50% or more of it goes to anything recognizable as a medical good or service. It's the vast growth of all these administrators compared with physicians. They include nonprofit hospitals that charge up to 10 times as much for a surgical procedure as the Surgery Center of Oklahoma does. They include brokers who reprice medical bills, getting 30% discount from a bill that is overpriced by a factor of 2 or more and pocketing a cut of the savings. And they include the code writers, the regulation writers, the auditors, the software and hardware vendors, and the data aggregators who are selling your medical record for profit. In other words, we've talked about draining the swamp in Washington, D.C., but Dr. Jane Orient says there's another swamp, and it's made up of those individuals who receive quite a bit of income, but they aren't really helping the patients. They aren't really providing any kind of service or drug or treatment, and those are individuals that are another reason why the cost is going up. So again, Alex points out it could be a booby trap, and this, if nothing else, is what I call the Pottery Barn problem. You break it, you own it. The Republicans, if they do pass something and it doesn't address some of these issues effectively, then all the complaints in the future will not be about what was in Obamacare, but what is in this Republican plan, which Chuck Schumer and others are starting to call, isn't it interesting, Trump Care. Not that Donald Trump has anything to do with it, but it is going to be, I think, a particular name that's going to be very quickly given to the Republican health care plan if some of the changes that probably do need to take place aren't actually implemented. Let's take a break, though, and we'll come back and take some more phone calls. We've got a lot more to put on the table, but I also want to hear your comments. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to read a couple of those articles I've read from, they're the first 2 articles on our website. I'm going to read from some others, and I'll also take your phone calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Many Muslim women follow an interpretation of the Quran obliging them to cover their heads for the sake of dignity, modesty, and bodily integrity. To have the head covering removed can be morally humiliating. Deshaun Smith was pulled over by Long Beach police soon after both he and Christy Powell, his wife, were arrested. Smith informed the officers that it would violate their faith for Powell to be touched by a man or have her hijab removed. Officers of their own gender searched the pair, but when it came time for booking photos, Powell was physically forced to remove her hijab. Now stop for a moment and put yourself in this couple's shoes. Perhaps your faith does not require your head to be covered, but what if your wife was forcefully undressed by a male police officer? What if you were forced by an officer of the law to violate a tenet of your faith? The city of Long Beach has now changed their policy. Now, those who wear a head covering will be permitted to keep it on, so long as it presents no safety or security concerns. We expect law enforcement to provide for the safety and security of themselves and the public at large, even while they respect and preserve the religious liberty of every citizen. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Press Truth Out writing in the New York Times put it this way: it's a piece of legislation caught betwixt and between. It includes enough in the way of tax credits and regulations to be labeled Obamacare light by the party's would-be ideological enforcers, but it also promises to throw many people off the insurance rolls, many Trump voters included, for the sake of uncertain policy goals. So he says, so it's a bill that nobody in the right much likes, not libertarians, not reformicons, not right-wing donors, and not mushy moderates, nor the Tea Party senators who promised full repeal, and not the swing state senators who know well that their own voters want the coverage expansion to endure. As for Americans who aren't ideologically committed, forget about that. Passing the bill would be an invitation to a political beheading. So those are just a few of the comments being made about this legislation. What are your comments? If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to Georgia, WLPE. Lily, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, hi. Kerby, thank you for all that you do to educate. I just had a kind of a simple question about the elective surgery. Why can abortion be other than electric surgery unless there's something really absolutely detrimental to the woman? Why is that not elective surgery, but it's elective surgery if you want to get laser and stuff, if you have a skin disorder, that won't be covered because it may not be cancer, or breast augmentation if you have another anatomical deformity versus cancer. So why can't abortion be elective surgery? Because that's basically what it is.
Well, and again, the biggest issue right now in the debate is whether or not you would fund abortion. There is a provision in the bill that would not allow states to use what's called direct spending on prohibited entities, and those would be probably like to defund Planned Parenthood. But, you know, the question I would come back to is, why should we have the government tell you one way or the other? At a time right now when abortion is legal, I would want to make it illegal. I would want to overturn Roe versus Wade, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. The reality is what the reality is. And so as a result, let's, if individuals want to spend their money on it, let them do so, but let's not call it health care, and let's, get away from even using abortion issues as part of our health care. There are a lot of things right now, frankly, that are even listed under health care. Let's talk about some others, breast augmentation, various kinds of fat reduction surgeries and all sorts of things, some of which you could call health care and some you could not. When you have either an insurance company or a bureaucrat in Washington making those decisions, those aren't the people that should be making the decisions. That's between you and your doctor, and if some of it isn't covered, well, then you come up with your own money and pay for it yourself. But I don't, when you have these regulations, 20,000 pages of regulations from the Affordable Care Act, it tells every doctor and every hospital and ultimately all of us patients what we can and can't do with our money. Doesn't make sense to me.
That's true. Yeah. No, it doesn't. But yeah, that would be the best way to go.
I would think so. Let's give a few more of you a chance to join our conversation today. We'll try to get through as many as we can. Let's go to Keith in Georgia on the Good News Network. Keith, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Kerby. Listen, long-time listener. Appreciate what you do. I'm just going to ask a question and then hang up. And by the way, in Georgia, we call it the Unaffordable Care Act.
You have paid a heavier price in Georgia than probably any other state, I finally found out.
That is true. All right. A little while ago, you had a guy come on to talk about the penalties.
Right.
If I filed my taxes today and I'm able to not choose not to mention anything about what is it, 61, line 61, but now I filed my taxes earlier and I was fined. I believe it was $600. Now, if today you can fill it out and not be fined, what about the ones that have already been fined?
Yeah, again, I see a court case coming because they could say that we are asking you whether in 2016, when Obamacare was legal, and when it was the law of the land, and it still is legal in the law of the land today, did you or did you not have actually an insurance plan? And I think the argument would be, if you didn't, you still have to pay the penalty. But I also am pointing out that right now people are not necessarily required to fill out line 61. So if you're looking for a possible tax refund, I don't know. It's going to be tough because they're going to, I think any court would probably rule that you're answering the question in 2017 for whether you had one in 2016. That was the law of the land. So it's interesting that right now they're not necessarily requiring that you mandate fill out line 61, but at the same time, it was the law. Whether you like it or not, it was the law. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. I'm thinking.
And there are laws that, like in criminal cases where, if there's a law changed and it affects you positively, then you
in other words, you would grandfather it or something. Possibly.
Right.
Possibly. I wouldn't hold out hope for it, but it's, at least a possibility. So we'll see.
$600. But anyway, thanks a lot. And again, I appreciate what you do. And you have a great day.
Yeah. And again, the point is that you don't have to fill out line 61. That still doesn't necessarily mean you wouldn't have to pay the fine. But we will see. We'll go, as I said, we're kind of getting into that no man's land. There's a little bit of shades of gray into some of that, so we'll just try to figure out what that means as we go along. Let's go to Georgia again in the Good News Network and listen to Alan. What would you like to share?
Yes, Kirby, thank you for taking my call. First, a real quick response to the previous caller. Let's don't forget what Jesus said. Give to Caesar what render to Caesar what is Caesar's. If it's a penalty that you got to pay for not having it, as badly as we don't like it, we're going to have to pay it.
Right.
I've got to pay it this year myself because I didn't have a insurance plan the entire year. But render to Caesar what's Caesar's. And my second thing is, not that we're going about it completely the wrong way, but one of the things we need to look at is 3 years ago I had gallbladder surgery. The total price for the surgery was $35,000. I had no insurance at the time.
Right.
The doctor charged $4,500. So $30,500 was hospital bills. On that bill, I had been given 2 Tylenol at some point, and I kid you not, it was $250 per
Oh, I know. That's where we know that game.
I mean, healthcare could be way more affordable if we would curtail some of these erroneous, outrageous charges that these hospitals are charging to pay for these $500,000 administrators they have.
And again, that's one of the reasons I posted this article by Dr. Jane Orient. That's the second article, and Alan, I would especially encourage you to get it, but everybody else. It's entitled Obamacare Replacement Won't Drain the Healthcare Swamp. And she's been on the program with us before, and you might say, well, who is she? Well, she is the executive director of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. Also has been the president of Doctors for Disaster Preparedness and a number of other things. But she points out that when we talk about draining the swamp, a lot of those are just what you were talking about just a minute ago. Some of those individuals that actually reprice medical bills and the rest. And so if you want to kind of get the inside story on why you have to pay $250 for a Tylenol pill, or why there are all those extraneous charges, if you think there's extraneous charges on your cell phone bill, you just need to look at a typical hospital bill, and you can see why some of those costs are out of control. We're going to continue taking your phone calls, but I do have one of those mandatory breaks. As I said, maybe in the last half of the second hour we'll change topics, but we'll keep on this one because I know many of you'd like to talk about the Republican replacement or about the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back, and those of you on the line, just stay tuned. And stay on the line. We'll give you a first opportunity to share your story when we come back. And if you'd like to read some of the articles we posted today, they're all available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
One of the best gifts ever was when my mother took my entire family on a 7-day cruise to Alaska. The cruise itself was amazing, the food and everything else aboard. But the scenery, the wildlife, the mountains, the glaciers, it was incredible. I encourage you, if you can ever go, if you can give a gift like that to a friend or someone in your family, do it. You will not regret it. And here's an even better offer. Go with the team from Point of View and Kelly this year, August, Ketchikan Cruise Amsterdam. Grab your passport. Get all the details at pointofview.net/Alaska or request a brochure at 800-347-5151. Cruise with the crew of Point of View. Pointofview.net/Alaska and 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Talking about the Republican plan of repeal and replace, and it is moving its way through Congress, and we'll see exactly what that looks like tomorrow in our Friday weekend edition. Number of groups actually have lined up against it, as you might imagine. ARP, which would be the American Association of Retired Persons, has come out against it. But of course, even so, one of the things Guy Benson points out is when you go back a number of years to when the Affordable Care Act was being debated, ARP actually endorsed the bill, even though there were all sorts of senior citizens who were against it. And their argument even now is that this might in one way or another harm individuals. And of course, guess what? It did harm some of the individuals that they represented. The American Medical Association, again, came out in favor of the Affordable Care Act, this time against it. But again, this was a number of years ago when some of their doctors, matter of fact, a plurality of their doctors were against the Affordable Care Act. They supported it anyway. And of course, lots of conservative organizations, Heritage Action, Cato Institute, Freedom Works, and a number of others. But let's take some phone calls left over from the last hour. We'll go to Georgia WLPE. Shannon, thank you for joining us. I think you want to share a story with us today.
Hey.
Hey.
How are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for joining us.
I'm not going to stay long because I'm in Walmart right now.
Okay, thank you.
My question is, why has no one addressed the fact that when you have insurance and you have, like, let's just say a $5,000 deductible, and you go and you still have to pay out of pocket, it is 3 times higher than if you were self-pay and had no insurance.
Very true. Yeah.
I worked for a doctor's office, not say who, but the MRIs, self-pay were $350. With insurance, it was $1,300.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, when someone else is paying for it and you're not paying for it, the patient's not paying for it, the doctor's not paying for it, a third party's paying for it, then that's the case. And I've even heard them say that if you are in a taxi ride in, say, New York City, and you ask for a receipt, they'll charge you more because they know if you're getting a receipt, it's a business expense. But if you pull out your cash, they will charge you less. It's the same kind of phenomenon in a doctor's office or a taxi cab, and we all understand that.
Crazy.
Yeah, it is so crazy.
Because people have deductibles. They still have to pay that out of pocket, that expense. So,
yeah. Well, and I know you're in Walmart, so I won't keep you long, but I appreciate you giving us an inside look, having worked at a doctor's office, because we all know that. And if you do some comparison shopping, guess what? That's another issue. Then you begin to recognize that unless it's an emergency, if it's an elective surgery, you can find that it's going to cost you a lot less to go to one hospital or one doctor compared to another one. And we comparison shop right there in Walmart, I bet you comparison shop. And we do that in every area except healthcare. And I think that needs to change and get some transparency.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and thank your team. Y'all are doing a great job.
Well,
okay?
Thank you. Thank you for hanging on. I knew she was, I wanted to get to her right away. You can call even from your cell phone right there in Walmart, and we'll take some more phone calls in just a minute. But I did want to just kind of focus that attention for just a minute on the fact that if you have a health savings account, and again, let's give credit where credit is due, because there are a lot of things to not like about this Republican plan. There are some things to like about it. One is to try to address this issue of people jumping in and out of insurance when they need it, although I don't think the penalties are high enough to actually be a deterrent. But one of the tremendous benefits of the Republican plan is that vastly increases, it increases, let's not say vastly increases, but it increases the number of health savings accounts. And that's good because then if you are spending your money and you have those dollars in your hand and getting, whether a coronary bypass or an MRI or just all sorts of things that might be elective surgery or elective services, you're going to pay attention to that. And we all know that works in the doctor's office. We know it works in taxi drivers' back seat and all sorts of things. We see that in restaurants. If somebody says to you, what's on the left side of the menu, and hardly even look at the price, although you probably glance at it. But if they say, let's go out, but, you pay for your meal and I pay for my meal, you're going to pay a lot more attention to what's on the right-hand side of the menu and what it's going to cost. And so we understand when someone else is paying for it, you don't pay attention to the cost quite as much. Let's take some other questions and phone calls. We'll head to Louisiana, KVDP, and Brenda. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I was just wanting to make a statement. In 16, my taxes for 15, the government said that I owed $174 above what my taxes were supposed to be back to me.
Uh-huh. Was it because of insurance? Like you didn't have an approved policy?
I had insurance all but 3 months last year.
Wow.
Okay. 15. Okay. Last year I had it for 12 months, and they still penalized me $600.
Again, I can't answer all the questions there, but I would, from what little you've told me there, at least go to something, an H&R Block or an accountant or something, and say, is this right? Because it may be that you could actually challenge that. And in the past, sometimes we've had people like Dan Pillow on the program talking about how you can challenge some of these penalties, get a reduction in them. And so getting somebody that might be able to look at that and have a little more understanding, it's possible that you could at least get a reduction in that penalty. But I can't, at the moment, without looking at all the details and not having access to all that information, probably couldn't give you a very good answer. So let me jump to another phone call real quickly. In Texas, KJRT. Gene, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, I wanted to, I think they're going, I don't know about, you said something about all the regulations. Well, in 2016, I've had a eye damage. It's been years and years. 1980, but anyway, it started bleeding, and I was being treated in 2015 and 2016.
Uh-huh.
In 2016, when I went in for my appointment, because Obamacare kicked in this regulation, the doctor had to order, I had my appointment, and I had to have 2 appointments instead of 1. Then the doctor orders this medication to give me a shot in the eye. Okay, the eye medication for a shot went from $75 in 2015 to $2,000 in 2016.
Sticker shock. That's right.
Well, here's the reason, though. Because somewhere in the Obamacare, one of his buddies or cronies they're a holding company for this medication for all the people in the United States of America that's on Medicare, Medicaid, whatever, or I'm a veteran, VA. And so everybody that's getting that shot, when you have macular degeneration or anything like that, it went up to $2,000, and then you have to have 2 appointments, not just 1 like it was before.
Sure.
So,
and again, that's, that it's what's on the formulary, and then what's on the protocol, and everything that was done there took somewhat routine. I don't want to overplay the routineness about it, somewhat routine situation, and made it expensive, very expensive. And again, thank you for sharing that. I'm coming to a break here, but when we talk about those 20,000 pages of regulations, you go through some of those and they're just mind-boggling, especially when in the original bill, which it was 2,000 pages itself, had lots and lots of statements. The Secretary of Health and Human Services shall determine. Well, in some cases, they were bureaucratic regulations that help their friends and their cronies. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, an interesting aspect of the immigration debate is how forgiving many Americans can be towards illegal aliens while never extending that same measure of grace to American citizens. One example can be found in the use of the term false documents. The discussion started with a Wall Street Journal editorial that expressed concern that the Department of Homeland Security policy might be so sweeping that it could capture law-abiding immigrants whose only crime is using false documents to work. Victor Davis Hanson couldn't let that statement stand and decided to write a quick response. He explains that rarely is this just a one-time minor transgression by an immigrant in order to create a false document in order to go to work. He says it usually involves the deliberate creation of a false identity, sometimes at the expense of a real person, and often with accompanying fraudulent Social Security numbers and photo identifications. These are crimes that foul up the bureaucracy for law-abiding citizens and even facilitate other crimes. While it may be true that an illegal immigrant might need to create a false document in order to find a job in the United States, it is not merely an endgame or minor infraction. Other possible infractions follow from this first crime of entering the country illegally. Let's at least acknowledge that if a law-abiding citizen engaged in creating false documents, they would face some form of punishment. The government would at least fine them, if not imprison them, for creating false documents. Sure, there are law-abiding immigrants whose only infraction may indeed be the fact that they created a false identity in order to get to work. But the many examples Victor Davis Hanson uses in his column are a reminder that false documents are often not the only infraction. Frequently, false documents make it easier to commit other crimes. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Looking at the Republican plan that is making its way through Congress. Of course, we'll be talking about this tomorrow on our Friday weekend edition. Let me just give you a program note. At the bottom of the hour, we're going to go to an interview I did with Dr. Luke Barnes. I thought it would be good just to kind of get away from some of this for a while, and we'll talk with him as we did just the other day about intelligent design. Fascinating new book called The Fortunate Universe. But we'll take a few more phone calls here. Let me just mention that many of you have actually come up with a Christian alternative, and that is in the original Affordable Care Act. Section 1501 gave some exemptions to Obamacare, and one of those was for a health sharing ministry that existed in some form since 1999. And so there are three that qualify. We've done interviews with each one of them at one time or another. MediShare, we've interviewed Tony Meggs a couple of times, 58,000 households. Which has, of course, MediShare. You have Samaritan's Ministries. We had Anthony Hopp on recently. They've been around since 1995, about 68,000 households. And then Christian Healthcare Ministries, been around really since 1981. Howard Russell, about 100,000 believers over time that they've ministered to. So these are another alternative. There's every reason to believe, but I need to check this out, that these will still be considered exemptions and be alternatives to insurance, and I think illustrate again something that makes sense from a Christian point of view. In Acts 2, we're to take care of one another. To actually be part of this, of course, you have to agree with their statement of faith, which is pretty straightforward. Usually there's a code of conduct, and sometimes you have to write out your testimony, but these are three different organizations we've talked about in the past that are a good alternative to insurance, in which you're really with like-minded Christians. You know that you're dollars are not going towards all sorts of things that would be of concern to you, whether it's drug and alcohol abuse counseling or whether it's for abortion or a variety of other issues, and that you are really dedicated to a healthy lifestyle. So just might mention those are alternatives out there, and I think they will still remain even with this Republican health care plan, if indeed it passes the House, the Senate, and is signed by President Trump. But it's a long way to go before any of that takes place. Okay, well, we'll take another phone call here. We'll go to Karen in North Carolina. Karen, thank you for joining us today.
Hi there. I just wanted to say I haven't heard the other comments, so I'm going blind here. But my own personal experience is I'm covered under the ACA. It's the best insurance I've ever had. The premiums are low. The co-pays are low. It's giving me good health insurance. I do agree, that probably changes need to be made with our health care system. But I think Congress is pushing this bill through without knowing the premium cost for all income levels for people. They have no idea how many, and I do think it will be millions, are going to lose their health care, and how people are really afraid. I'm one of those people. I'm 60 years old. I now have a pre-existing condition. They're talking about the max taxpayer for 60-year-olds is $4,000 a year. My income's $1,700, and I'm thinking about $1,000 premium to get a good policy. With that tax credit is going to put me at over $600 a month to get the good health care that I currently have right now. And, that's unaffordable. That's not my dental insurance. It's not vision insurance. So it's going to be unaffordable to me. I think people are going to end up using the emergency rooms again. And it's my understanding, too, hospitals are against this for that very reason. I just wish Congress would not push it through and just make changes slowly after they know the effects that it's going to have on people. I went to a Save My Healthcare rally today in Greenville, North Carolina, and there was a lady there that had given birth to a disabled child in a wheelchair. The child was, she looked like a child. She looked like she was 13. She was actually 30 years old. She's receiving Medicaid. This lady is so scared that the Medicaid change is coming. And here we are Christians, and we believe in the value of every life. But this lady is quaking that she is going to lose health care for this child that has no voice but her voice. Who's standing up for older people with pre-existing conditions? I know my premiums are going to be higher. And to hear them say, we're just going to lower costs, we're not going to go back to where we were before. Of course we are. If we're going to require insurance companies to cover people with pre-existing conditions, they're not in business to lose money. They've got to raise premiums. So I just think that we need to make changes slowly. You need to get medicines down. Insurance companies are paying a fortune for prescription medications. We haven't done anything about that in this country. We haven't done anything with our food, with the FDA. We still allow trans fat in our foods here. They don't do that over in Europe. Sodium is high. They're supposed to start addressing that. So, I'm happy with it, and I am really, really concerned about what this is going to do to my health care, and I don't think my representatives know. And if anyone wants to see that lady, she was on TV. It will be on tonight. It's going to be on WNCC. It's Channel 9. They're out of, I think they're out of Greenville.
Okay, we'll watch for it there. I think we got the point that certainly one of the issues that is, I think, going to be the Achilles heel for this Republican plan is they, of course, do not have it scored from the Congressional Budget Office. And Karen, I think, represents a concern that others have had, both on the left and the right. Are you moving too quickly and not understanding some of the possible consequences? But let me take a few more phone calls because a few more of you would like to join the conversation. So let's head to South Carolina. Camilla, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for taking my call. I'd just like to say that I think the health care is way too big and complicated for the federal government to handle. And I would like to see, I'd just like to throw out the idea of maybe the federal government partnering with each state and possibly the states helping support all the medical expense. and let each state come up with their best idea, and then over a period of time find the state that works best, or the healthcare system that works best, but put it in the hands of the state for a while and just see what they could come up with.
Sure. And again, that's something that we've talked about in terms of federalism, and sometimes the states can be the laboratory of experimentation. One discussion has been to take the money right now that is going to Medicaid and provide that as block grants and let the states take care of it, because just think about that. You're in South Carolina. We just heard from Karen in North Carolina. We have some from Louisiana. We have people in California. We have people in Illinois. Really, healthcare issues are very different, say, in Mississippi than they are in Michigan, very different, say, in California than they are in South Carolina. I mean, we understand that some of those changes are probably taking really focused best at the local level or at the state level, where there's a little more response and there's a little more accountability. So that's another very helpful idea. And as we go through this discussion, as I pointed out before, we are a divided country. There are people that said we didn't vote for Obamacare. There are now people that are saying we're not going to vote for the Republican plan. Of course, the whole question about change, and I think we just heard a minute ago from Karen, and I'm sure that represents millions of people that are saying, what's the future? I'm afraid of what this is going to look like. So this is something that the Republican leadership are going to have to address. It's something President Trump is going to have to address, and we're in this debate, so we're going to be talking about it for some time. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to change topics, and that is to last half hour give you a chance to hear an interview I did recently with Dr. Luke Barnes. He is actually from Australia and the co-author of this wonderful book, Fortunate Universe, Life in a Finely Tuned Cosmos. And so many times we talk about this idea of intelligent design, and he, looking at it from a physics point of view, has really put together some material that, once again, to me, gives us a real understanding of the design in nature, which implies a designer. His co-author of the book is an atheist, and so in the second part of the interview, we talk about the kind of point-counterpoint they do between an atheist who says, well, we just got lucky. We won the cosmic lottery, and all of this just happened by chance. And then, of course, Dr. Luke Barnes, who says, yeah, but I think the design implies a designer. So I think you'll appreciate the debate and the discussion. And this is not the last time we're going to talk about repeal and replace. I think that will be front and center tomorrow as we have our roundtable discussion with Kelly Shackelford and Penna Dexter. Let me encourage you, if you can, to go and find some of the articles we've posted there today on the website, pointofview.net. We also, in my Viewpoints commentary, have something about false documents, which relates to the immigration and refugee debate that we'll be talking about in the future. So all of it available at our website, pointofview.net. And take the time to read some of those articles, because, as I pointed out just a minute ago, that one by Dr. Jane Orient tells us a little bit more why we get these very expensive hospital bills, and maybe why there's a way to cut some of those costs without hurting the impact that it has on people. We'll be back right after this.
Former White House policy advisor Gary Bauer.
It's only by listening to things like Point of View that Americans find out what the ultimate agenda is. What we've all got to do is make sure programs like yours and this network continue to thrive, because that's the only way millions of Americans are going to find out the information that they need.
And the way to ensure Point of View Radio thrives is by going online right now or picking up the phone to join Truth Team 360. We bring information, wisdom, and encouragement to help you take action for the good of this community and the nation. Go online now to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Select your giving amount, choose your gift, stand together with people all across the land on Truth Team 360. Pointofview.net/team. Join Truth Team 360 by phone 1-800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
If you listen to Point of View, you know that oftentimes we talk about this idea of intelligent design, and we wanted to give you another opportunity to hear exactly how we can begin to understand what it's like to be in this finely tuned universe. And we are privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Luke Barnes, a postdoctoral researcher at the Sydney Institute for Astronomy. Earned a scholarship to complete a PhD at the University of Cambridge, has published papers in the field of galaxy formation and on the fine-tuning of the universe, and is one of the contributors to this book, Fortunate Universe, Life in a Finely Tuned Cosmos. And Luke, thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me.
Let's, if we can, use some of the illustrations that you use. And one of those is if you bake a cake, you recognize very early that you got to have all the ingredients. And sometimes if the ingredients are a little bit off, it still works. But if you leave out too many ingredients or you add too many extra ingredients, you end up with an inedible mess. And that's kind of an illustration for what we find ourselves with in terms of the universe, isn't it?
Yes, we find that the universe has various things that it's made out of, various ways that those things interact with each other, various ways that it started off and has evolved over a long period of time. So we find that when we take the universe as it is and say, how could it have been different, a lot of those ways in which it could have been turn out to be a bit of a mess.
Yes.
So they wouldn't permit life as we know it.
Well, and again, whether it's the physical constants, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, or a variety of other issues, that is certainly one aspect. But also another example you use is a radio set. You know, anybody that's actually tuned in a radio, and many of us now have digital ones, so we don't know. But I'm old enough to remember where you would turn the dial, that you really want to be right within a very narrow range. I've had some cosmologists say it's kind of like you have a room full of different dials, and every one is set just perfectly, and you move a dial, just maybe one dial, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. You don't have a universe. A little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. You don't have an intelligent life. And so, again, we find ourselves in a situation which, as you point out, is a fortunate universe, right?
Yeah, so that's a picture of what we mean when we say that something is fine-tuned. We don't necessarily mean, when a physicist uses that word, we don't mean that there's a fine-tuner necessarily. That's just what the word means.
Yes.
What we mean is that if you've made a small change to some assumption that you've made, suddenly a lot different things happen in the way the universe would have turned out. So the picture of the radio dial is a good way to imagine that. Yes, small change, and suddenly you've got static.
You know, you've had some individuals, one individual writing books called The Rare Earth, that just sort of said, well, you know, we got kind of just hit the cosmic lottery. We just got lucky. But you point out in one of the discussions here that just because we have lots of planets does not necessarily mean that there's lots of life. And right now there's a real excitement about finding some other planets out there that look like they're maybe in the solar habitable zone of this solar system, or might be about the right size. But you need just a little bit more than just the right size planet and water in order to get life, don't you?
Yeah, so planets aren't really my topic of the
Sure.
book, but it's quite interesting that there does seem to be a lot of different things that you need in order to have a life supporting planet. So these new planets that were discovered just a week or so ago by NASA, they seem to be about the right size, and some of them seem to be about the right distance from the star to maybe have some water on the surface. But they were so close that they what's called tidally locked. The same side of the star, planet always faces the star. So one side would be very hot and the other side very cold.
But one of the things that we heard years ago from people like Carl Sagan is that the universe must just be brimming with life. But as people have begun to do a little bit more research on the fine-tuning of the universe, that idea that there's just got to be life everywhere, that it looks just like a Star Trek movie, is at least being a little more questioned, isn't it?
Well, there's two separate issues here. What our book is about is really about the fundamental properties of the universe. So in that case, either the universe can support life or it can't, and we're considering things on that kind of level. The question of, okay, we've got a universe which can at least do some interesting things like make atoms and compound and chemicals and all that sort of thing. it's another question then of whether life will actually form. And we're physicists. We don't really know.
Let's look at some of those physical constants for just a minute. And this is where your book was really helpful to me, because I find myself sometimes talking about the strong and weak nuclear force or the ratio of gravity to other things. But you have some great little diagrams here in which you on one axis have a strong force, on another axis you have the fine structure constant. And you point out that basically there's just a very narrow band for some of these kinds of properties. If, again, back to my illustration, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, you don't even really have a universe, because the real physical constants and structures, all from a secular point of view fortuitously, or from a Christian point of view, from a creationist point of view, all come together. And I love some of these little diagrams where it'll say, you are here, and it shows, well, we're just right exactly where we would want to be in terms of some of those physical constants.
Yeah, so there's a variety of ways to ruin the universe. Sometimes it's not there, but a lot of the times the structure that we need to make a human person or make anything interesting in the universe just isn't there. So in one of these particular diagrams, if you're in a particular region, you just won't have the periodic table at all. Mm-hmm. All of the chemicals that we need to make the body that we're all inhabiting simply aren't there. The nuclei won't form. They aren't stable. And so a lot of the ways that our universe makes complicated things, complex things like us, just can't happen.
One of the other ones I saw was on gravitational constant on one axis and fine structure constant on another. You have this black, and it says all these areas, no stable stars, and then one small area where you'd have stable stars, and again, there's a little button, you're right here, which gets us back to kind of the title of your book, The Fortunate Universe. We find ourselves fortunate that we're in a place where we actually can have stars, because if you don't have stars, you don't have all the other things necessary for what we are actually experiencing right now as living beings.
Yeah, so stars are crucial in a couple of different ways. They make the elements that we are made out of. So the universe, we know, starts off with just hydrogen and helium, but then it's stars that produce those bigger elements like carbon, which are very important, and then send them out into the universe. And of course, the sun provides the energy we need for life. So as we look over how the universe could have been, how we could make gravity stronger or weaker, or how we could make the electric and magnetic forces stronger and weaker, you've got to be in it's not absolutely tiny, perfectly sharp, but a fairly smallish region in order to have stars that will burn in a stable way and then get to the end of their lives and give out all those wonderful chemicals they made into the universe.
One of the other ones that you have in here is the idea of the expansion rate of the universe. Too fast, too slow. Again, many people refer to it as the Goldilocks universe. It's sort of in that narrow band that gives us the kind of planets, galaxies, solar systems that we have come to expect.
Yeah, so we see that the universe is expanding, because whenever we look at a galaxy out there in the universe, they're almost all moving away from us. And we can understand that in terms of what Einstein taught us about gravity, and so we can turn the clock back and start the universe again with some slightly different properties and see what happens. So in some of those universes, they expand too slowly, so they recollapse, and then that really is a case where you don't have a universe. In other universes, they expand too fast, and no structure will form. Nothing forms any kind of, a blob of anything in the universe. That's actually an interesting case where we think that we've got some deeper issues. So there's always a possibility of we could go deeper and try to understand this one. So there are theories about why that happens. The question then is, are those theories fine-tuned?
Well, again, one of the other ones that I thought was very interesting is dimensions. We take for granted that we live in a three-dimensional world, and also that we have time. And again, you have one of these diagrams that say, well, if you're talking about one or two dimensions, that's really too simple. If you talk about more than three dimensions, it's unstable. And so, again, we find ourselves in a situation with three dimensions in time that helps us understand, again, the importance of the dimensions of time and space that we find ourselves in as well as beings.
Yeah, this is quite an entertaining one for me, actually. You can make models of our solar system, of course, using what Newton taught us about gravity. Mm-hmm. We can set off the solar system as we see it and watch all the planets go around. Our Earth isn't in a perfectly circular orbit, it's in an almost circular orbit, but it still comes back to where it started. It just takes a slightly sort of oval shaped rather than a perfect circle. If the universe had been four-dimensional, we can take our equations and write them down in a four-dimensional universe and ask what would happen. This actually applies 4, 5, 6, any number of higher dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is if the Earth had not been on a perfectly circular orbit, it would not come back to where it started.
Mm-hmm.
It would either spiral into the sun or spiral out into empty space. So there are no stable planetary orbits unless you have a three-dimensional universe, which is pretty interesting.
We'll take a break and continue our conversation with Dr. Luke Barnes right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Many Muslim women follow an interpretation of the Quran obliging them to cover their heads for the sake of dignity, modesty, and bodily integrity. To have the head covering removed can be morally humiliating. Deshaun Smith was pulled over by Long Beach police soon after both he and Christy Powell, his wife, were arrested. Smith informed the officers that it would violate their faith for Powell to be touched by a man or have her hijab removed. Officers of their own gender searched the pair, but when it came time for booking photos, Powell was physically forced to remove her hijab. Now stop for a moment and put yourself in this couple's shoes. Perhaps your faith does not require your head to be covered, but what if your wife was forcefully undressed by a male police officer? What if you were forced by an officer of the law to violate a tenet of your faith? The city of Long Beach has now changed their policy. Now, those who wear a head covering will be permitted to keep it on, so long as it presents no safety or security concerns. We expect law enforcement to provide for the safety and security of themselves and the public at large, even while they respect and preserve the religious liberty of every citizen. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Dr. Luke Barnes as we talk about his book, The Fortunate Universe. One of the big questions is about a multiverse. Is this a way in which it might be able to answer the question about the design in the universe?
Oh, I should say that my co-author on the book is Geraint Lewis, who's a professor at the University of Sydney and a good friend and colleague of mine. He's an atheist.
Yes.
So when he looks at all of this stuff, that's the conclusion he reaches at the end. So the final, we wrote 7 chapters of the book together about all the science, and we sort of agree on almost all of that. But in chapter 8, we we have a conversation about what all of this means, and that's what Geraint ends up defending, is that this idea that we have a cosmic lottery. Now, there are some good reasons to take that idea seriously, because we're doing cosmology. So the fact that the universe is a very big place that we're never going to completely get our heads around is something most cosmologists have to get used to. To make this kind of idea work, there's a couple of things it will need. It seems like we'd need some sort of universe generator, which will just keep pumping out universes, as many as we need. There are some ideas in science about how in science and cosmology about how we might be able to do that. So that part of the story, there are some ideas. What we don't know is there's two things that we really don't know. One of them is whether we can test this idea enough that it will be a scientific theory. So there have been some cosmologists, some, from various backgrounds of theist or atheist, who have just said that this idea is simply not scientific. And so we can't test it. Maybe we just have to say we don't know. So that's one side of things. Is this the sort of idea that science should be thinking about at all? The other side of this is if we treat this idea seriously for a minute, and as a cosmologist, you really should, because it's one of the ways the universe could be. There's a question of whether it will really explain the fine-tuning, because what we would require is that across this idea for a multiverse that you have, if you went around to every little bit of the multiverse and asked anyone that you found there, what's your universe like? If we found that our universe was atypical, if it wasn't the typical thing you found, then it seems like that theory makes a wrong prediction. If all of the universes were purple and ours isn't purple, then that's a bit of a problem.
Dr. Luke Barnes with us, and let's see if we can pursue that for another question or two, because some people said, well, would the laws of physics apply in these other multiverses? Because you have a whole chapter here dealing with entropy and enthalpy and all sorts of other aspects of that as well. That's one of the things that have always led people to believe that the universe had a beginning and it's running downhill, headed towards an ultimate heat death. Would that be happening in these multiverses, or could we even be able to determine that?
I think if you're treating this question as a scientist, you need to have some sort of specific idea in mind. You need a model. And so what we usually want to do is not go too far from what we know. So we try and take the physics we know, or at least is sort of 1 degree of separation removed from that maybe explains something in the early universe, and see if we can use that to make a multiverse model, some way of making these other universes in which the constants, the properties of our universe, the mass of the particles, all of those sorts of things will be different. But obviously the question of what are some other ways the universe could be is a bit too open-ended for even a scientist to handle systematically.
One of the other things you talk about here is this idea of matter and antimatter. I know that people have asked about that as well. I think, as I understand it, you talk more about more matter than antimatter, but what about that? There's been questions about the mass of the universe and all sorts of other kinds of issues. What do we know at this point in our study of the universe?
What we know are two facts that seem to be in a bit of tension with each other, just straightforward scientific tension. We don't really know what's going on. Here's the two facts. One of them is that matter as we know it, the stuff that we are made out of, for every particle, there is what's called an antiparticle. This isn't some weird theory. We've seen other particles. We find them out in the universe. And so far as we can tell, the properties are the sort of exact mirror image of the matter that we know. There's a very small, slight change, but it's not particularly significant. There is this other type of matter called antimatter, which is, for all intents and purposes, is identical to matter as we know it. The other thing we know is that there's almost none of this matter out in the universe as a whole. It's a very, very small fraction of the total amount of matter in the universe, if it's any at all. We have to, if we want to make some, we need to get out a particle accelerator and do something pretty extreme to make it. So that's an open scientific question. Now, if the universe had started off with equal amounts of matter and antimatter, it seems like that those would almost completely annihilate each other. Whenever they meet, they produce particles of light, photons. If it had started off like that, we'd have a universe which was almost totally made of light, which doesn't interact with itself, and so wouldn't do anything particularly interesting. Now, one of the things we discuss in the book is we don't know enough to know whether that's a case of fine-tuning. I'm suspicious that it might be, But what we really want is some physical theory that tells us why that state of affairs is as it is. Why is it there's more matter than antimatter? At the moment, we don't know. So we don't know whether it's easy to make more matter than antimatter or not. So as a case of fine-tuning, we just have to say, I don't know, as opposed to all these other cases where we do know why the universe is the way it is, and we can answer the question of how would things be different if I changed these fundamental properties.
And what I was thinking as I especially read through your book, is there a lot of questions that still need to be figured out? And if nothing else, that looks like job security. So a great opportunity for individuals that want to come into this area of study and research. There are other theories, other kinds of observational investigations that need to take place.
Absolutely. So we don't yet know what 95% of the universe is made of. So we can build particle accelerators, we can do experiments on the matter that we know, but if our ideas about cosmology are right, then of all the sort of matter and energy in the universe, about 95% is in a form that has never showed up in a particle accelerator. In that sense, we can infer its existence out there in the universe from what it does in the way galaxies move and in the way they rotate, all those sorts of things. But in terms of wanting to know exactly what this stuff is, seeing how it moves in electric fields, how it hits other things, how it interacts, we just don't know. So there's a whole heap of, there's plenty more examples in the book of just stuff we don't know. So those are the cases where you can say, all right, let's just say I don't know for the moment, and that's fine.
Well, and it gets kind of funny because when most of us took our physics classes, at the end we said, well, we know everything. And then we started hearing about quantum physics, because I'm older than you are. And then you began to say, no, there's a whole lot we don't know. And so that's exactly what this book kind of gets us into. 360 pages, Cambridge University Press, and it's called A Fortunate Universe, Life in a Finely Tuned Cosmos. If people want to learn a little bit more, not only from the book, but to interact with you, or is there a website we can send them to, or there's some other resources that they can obtain?
So the easiest way to get in touch with both of us actually is we have a Twitter feed that's related to the book. So if you're on Twitter, it's just at A Fortunate Uni, UNI. So if you go and find A Fortunate Universe on Twitter and tweet us, we'll get back to you fairly shortly. We're both on there. There's also, there's a Facebook page for A Fortunate Universe and a blog. If people just put it into Google, they can find us fairly straightforwardly, and we love answering questions about all this sort of stuff.
Well, again, we've had in studio with us today Dr. Luke Barnes, co-author of the book, A Fortunate Universe, Life in a Finely Tuned Cosmos. A lot of great material, some of the kinds of issues we've covered every single day here on Point of View. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Just about out of time, and so again, let me encourage you to visit our website, pointofview.net. First three articles there have to do with the issue of the repeal and replace and some of the aspects of the Affordable Care Act. The fourth one on the Fortunate Universe, the interview we just did with Dr. Luke Barnes. Tomorrow, of course, is our Friday weekend edition. We'll get into religious liberty, some of the debates in Congress, so I hope you'll join us then. All of that is available on our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila. We'll see you back here tomorrow for our Friday weekend edition.
Modern life is go, 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 and Point of View is absolutely ready to go with you. I dare say that most of us have access to either a smartphone or a tablet, maybe even a computer that is app-based. There's a new way to keep up with Kerby and the team, the free Point of View radio app. With quick links to listen to the program live, to keep up and share Kerby's meaty and insightful viewpoints, commentaries, read articles on issues we're talking about that impact you and your family. Did you know you can also watch the show? Yes, radio with cameras. You can access that through the app as well. There's a link to our action alerts, how to find us on the radio across the nation, ways to contact us, and so much more. Visit your app store, iTunes or Google Play. Search for the Point of View radio app. There's no reason not to take us with you. The free Point of View radio app, available now for Apple and Android devices. And when you get it loaded, there's one more button I'd like you to press, the one that says Donate Now. Join Truth Team 360. Support us financially as we support you with the truth that you need. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.